government, which is supposed to be the action of change to make sure that they can live better lives. We think that this has been magnified because even if they're making somewhat misinformed decisions, and some of them will be rational, but now they have no discourse. Now they have no help either, Madam Speaker. Sorry, Mr. Speaker. So we believe that that is actually, that the fact that there is a failure rate is really, really bad. Then they talk about how it's not that hard. I know, Anson, you're a very intelligent individual. That's what we're debating here. You grew up in a good family. You know, you're a relatively high-income family. The thing is, you do not. When we're talking about people who grew up in the downtown east side, you know, who grew up in stark poverty, grew up with schools that are absolutely failing, we think that you cannot simply say it is not that hard. It may be immensely difficult, or at least these individuals may not feel comfortable doing a test. Although they may pass it, they might think, you know what, I haven't had a good experience with a test. I'm not one of those academic types. I don't want to do this. And we think that that's really bad. And then it says democracy should not be super accessible, but as my partner pointed out, the whole fact of democracy, the whole fact of the social contract is that everybody with like some rationality can go in and say, you are our government, now give us the laws that we need to live by. So if it's not accessible, then you're creating one class versus creating laws for another. That's not exactly what I would say slavery, but basically it's a master class and a class that's under what I talked about in my argument, and that is really bad. One class making laws for another. Then he talked about how we're not a direct democracy, we think democratic principles still apply. And then interestingly, he talked about how increasing civil education will solve it. Now we're all for that. However, in the model they said, sure, civic education will be increased. The fact is, we cannot say that the civic education with the downtown east side will be even comparable, even if increased, to education in other parts of the nation. The fact is, it's about ratios of people who are educated enough to vote. Because even if you increase education in the downtown east side, the fact is the ratios of people who to take a rich neighborhood, the fact is no matter how much you increase it, these people will still be disadvantaged to some degree. And this is the disadvantage we're talking about. That if you prevent disadvantaged people from voting, no matter how no matter how much you increase civic education, that is going to cause a disparity, because we cannot simply, throw money at civic education and make everybody informed and care about politics. So what we believe is that, in fact, this will not solve disparity. That in fact, what we'll have is we'll have two classes: those who are educated and can vote, and those who are not educated and do not have accountability. They have no recourse, and because they don't know about what a prime minister's name was in a certain time period, that they will not be able to direct our nation and will live as subhuman. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Speaker, for his comments, and call upon the Leader of Opposition to summarize this round with a 4-minute speech. I remind him that no new information is allowed unless it is in direct refutation. Hear, hear.
When I asked Table on a POI, how does the government get a mandate to govern if people don't vote, he got flustered and didn't give an answer. And that's because the answer is it has no mandate to vote to govern people who don't have the ability to vote. I'm going to bring forth 2 themes to summarize this round. Why can we vote in the first place, and how does the government make better decisions? Firstly, why can we vote in the first place? Now, Side Government brought up the social contract analysis about how you have a right to vote and you owe it to the government and to society to make a responsible vote. We think that's true, but we don't have a way to necessitate that. Namely, even if I pass a citizenship test, for example, I can still make really bad decisions. And under the status quo, Anson brought up in the POI, hey, can I still vote for Rick Perry if I like his ideas, if I like his videos? Sure, you can. Because we don't choose who votes based on how they're going to vote. We allow them to vote because that's how the government gets its mandate to govern. This was my first argument about the idea that we don't give our government the ability to make laws over us because there's some God-given right to do that, because there's some higher power that gives the government control over us. The government only has control over us because we consent to that relationship with the government. If you remove certain people from that relationship in the first place, you're fundamentally changing the idea of democracy, in that the government is now becoming an oppressive force, as my partner talked about, where it makes laws over certain people, but those people have no recourse over the decisions of the government. We think that's fundamentally wrong. We think fundamentally you're given the ability to vote, not because you're going to vote well, but because there's a government that's going to rule over you, and you need to have a say in how that government's run. And we think that the right to vote is fundamentally an inalienable even though they've violated the social contract, amended, they still get the right to vote. Next, I want to talk about how we get better decisions, and this is where the bulk of the clash was. So side government talked about the idea that if you are less educated in the government system, if you can pass a citizenship test, you're going to make harmful decisions. Firstly, we can test this and that it's not true. Because just because I don't know how a bill is passed in society doesn't make me unable to know the consequences of a tax reduction. It doesn't make me unable to know that I want lower taxes or higher taxes or the government help in the first place. We don't think that necessarily the mechanics of the government are something that you need in order to know what you want and what you deserve, right? But I think furthermore, even if this was the case, that's not what we allow our citizens to do. Because our citizens are still able to make harmful decisions if they want to in terms of voting. I can go out and vote for the Rhino Party if I wanted to. I still have that right because it's fundamentally my opinion how the government is run. And that's the one thing that's missing from side government's case. Because it's not about how we make better decisions. That's why we have debate in the first place. That way we have things outside of the political sphere of democracy, such as think tanks, such as the Senate, for Christ's sake. The idea is that we allow people to vote because they need to be participating in democracy, that we need to have representation, not because they have good ideas. Then they talk about multiculturalism and how we force people immigrating to Canada to pass a citizenship test. We say we don't force immigrants to pass a citizenship test because they're going to be voted. We allow them to pass we force them to pass a citizenship test because we want to know that they fully integrate into society. Because as my partner said, we want to know that we trust them to be part of the social contract we outlined because they come from a social contract that's different from ours. What we say in this case is that what we have in our citizens, what we're talking about is citizens who already exist in society. We're not changing anything about them because they're still part of that social contract. He talked about the idea of engagement. This is where the bulk of our case lies. He said that the government isn't going to be accountable if people are dumb. I don't think this is necessarily true because if you don't have people voting, then that certain sector of society isn't going to be accounted against. The people who are minorities, the people who live at Jane and Fifth, the Vancouver downtown east side, those people who are disadvantaged already are not going to be able to vote. They're not going to be part of the government who is making choices for them. It's fundamentally bad for democracy. It's fundamentally bad for our workplace. We can't possibly stand by this resolution with crowds of votes.
Speaker for his comments and call back to the floor the Leader of Government to conclude this round of debate with a 4-minute speech summarizing his case. Hear, hear.
Evidently, Denizen wants to vote for the Rhino Party. I say that if he doesn't understand the consequences of voting for the Rhino Party, if he doesn't understand how his vote actually makes effects in the government today, then he doesn't really have the right to make that decision. Why can I say that? We've explained this in our first point. Because the decision that you make as to the representation of the government, the decision that you make as to the workings of the government, and the decision that you make that government people, the people who want to get into government, strategize over in order to manipulate, affect other people. It affects other Canadians. It damages their rights, and it damages their votes. And therefore, to protect the vote, protect the votes of those ones that are responsible, to protect the votes of those who are aware of their decisions, we need to pass this motion. First, I'm going to refute a lot of what Valentine said, and then I'm going to move on towards two themes. First, on the issue of Canada deriving its mandate from the will of all people, and the second about enfranchisement. But first about Valentine. He talked about how there'll become two classes of citizens and how this will lead to class war. We disagree. First of all, we asked him, how do immigrants pass the test in the first place? As if this is true. We didn't get a satisfactory answer. Second of all, we actually think it's offensive when you say people in these areas can't ever get this kind of proper education. We also think that we've already defined in our model that we are going to encourage the provincial governments to fulfill their burden in spreading civic education to these areas anyway, because it's something that we should be doing in the first place, and it's something that we're failing to do right now. So we can see that this point just simply does not stand. Moving towards our first theme, Canada deriving its mandate from the will of all the people. It's the crux of the opposition case. We see several responses. The first response is that sometimes it has to do with policy, sometimes it has to do with structure. When the voice has to do with policy, maybe that's different. But when it has to do with structure, we don't actually have a lot of say in the structure of our government. We rarely ever actually do get to say a say. And when we do get to say a say, we have two responses to that, a practical and a principle split. Practically, we say, well, how do you understand what the will of the people actually is? How do you understand the will of the people when their votes are misinformed? How do you understand the will of the people when the people don't understand the consequences of their actions when they're voting? When one person says, by voting, I want X, but then it's interpreted because they